Welcome to the first ever episode of Series Under Siege. And this is a series where I break down our favorite video games from a development point of view, and we take a deep dive into what made them great. This is one of those games that started it all. We're talking one of the very first video game RPGs in a gaming landscape that didn't have them ever before. Stay mad, Dragon Quest fans. And a game that saved Square from bankruptcy, while establishing one of the most beloved RPGs of all time. But wait! Before we dive into the creation of the original Final Fantasy, I want to tell you about a project that's close to my heart. At FireCastleStudios, the gaming studio I started, the eclipse of April 8th, 2024, we're working on an RPG called EclipseOfEons. Can you guess why? If you love deep stories, immersive worlds, and classic RPG gameplay, this is a game you won't want to miss. You can follow our development journey at EclipseOfEons on almost any social media platform. We have a Facebook, we have a Reddit, we have a Twitter, we have an Instagram, we have... almost everything. We have a website coming too, it's just not finished yet. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to FireCastleStudios.com, and you can input your email into the waitlist, and that'll get you up to date when everything is beyond concept phase. Now let's go back into 1987 and see how Final Fantasy began. Square, according to Deepu Surotu, was originally a computer cafe, which is like our modern gaming internet cafes, but before the internet took off. If this surprises you, we didn't have the World Wide Web until 1989, which makes me older than the World Wide Web. Square was a struggling company on the brink of a collapse, and they needed a hit. Final Fantasy was supposed to be that hit. A last-ditch effort to save the studio. That's actually the reason why it's called Final Fantasy. And if you're like me, and you've been wondering all these years why Final Fantasy was not the Final Fantasy after 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and all their spin-offs, this is why. The very first one was supposed to be the final. Crazy, right? The game drew inspirations from various sources. Sakugichi was inspired by the anime films of Hayao Miyazaki. Personally, huge fan as well. It was also inspired by the fantasy elements and RPG mechanics by popular tabletop RPGs such as Dungeons & Dragons. In addition to being called Final Fantasy because of the company's dire financial situation, it could also be abbreviated FF in both English and Japanese. Fun fact. The studio's goals at the time were aimed at creating an RPG that could rival Dragon Quest. Dragon Quest was wildly successful in Japan, and Final Fantasy was intended to be their competitor in that genre. The mastermind behind Final Fantasy was Hironobu Sakaguchi, who directed and designed the game. He had a small but incredibly talented team working with him. This included Nasir Ghibelli, who was their programmer, Nobuo Uematsu, their composer, and I'm a huge fan. I listened to his tracks often as a teen, and I still listen to many remixes to this day. His iconic score set the tone for the series, even in the first game. Prelude and victory fanfare has become recurring motives throughout the series and is instantly recognizable to fans. You know it. And despite the limited sound channels of the Famicom, Uematsu managed to create a rich and memorable soundtrack that elevated the game's emotional resonance. If you guys have a favorite track from the game, tell me in the comments below. Yoshitaka Amano, who was the character designer, and Kazuka Shibuya was the graphic designer. Yoshitaka Amano's character designs brought a unique and ethereal quality to the game's visuals, though these designs were simplified for in-game sprites. The pixel art was vibrant and imaginative, making the most of the Famicom's limited color palette. The art style set a precedence for the series, with Amano's work influencing the aesthetic of future titles and the titles of many, many games. Pixel art, man, there's still games that are purposely made to this day with pixels because they have such a charm. And I really can't blame anybody. Kiyoshi and Ken Narita, programmers, and Hiroyuki Ito, debugger. The turn-based battle system, the class system, and the world map exploration became fundamental elements of the RPG genre. And these game mechanics would endure into titles reaching far outside the Final Fantasy genre. The game engine, while simple by today's standards, allowed for expansive world building and an engaging combat system. These innovations influenced countless RPGs that followed, including the entirety of the rest of the Final Fantasy series. The team was small, working under tight deadlines and limited resources, which led to innovative problem-solving and close-knit development environment. It's amazing any video game gets made, really. Gaming companies were typically offshoots of much larger companies that poured very minimal resources into those departments, and often they worked with donated machines that were retired from office environments. So a lot of games really were made in closets and basements and just any spare room that could be managed. Square's financial situation was dire, so the budget was modest. The exact budget for the original Final Fantasy isn't widely documented, and that's a theme you're going to hear time and time again with this series. We just don't have a lot of information on their early titles. But it is known to have been modest, particularly given Square's financial struggles at the time. This limitation pushed the team to be resourceful, leading to many creative decisions that defined the game. So I want you all to realize something. This is before we had a lot of plug-and-play options. Like, you had to make a game engine, you had to code everything, you had to make the art, you had to make the sounds, and it's not like they had creative assets that they could use. They were building everything from the ground up a lot of the times these days. While a budget of $500,000 doesn't sound like a lot, game budgets these days are multitudes of millions a lot of the time, including my own game, which has a projected budget of about $2 million, which to me sounds crazy. But if we're going to be making a fully fleshed game that is beyond what people would mostly expect from a starting indie game from a fresh studio, that's the caliber I intend to bring. Despite these constraints, the team managed to craft a game that looked and felt grand, far exceeding the expectations of it for a title of its budget. And when I say far exceeding, I mean even to this day, this first game has made them money. We're talking estimates equaling an ROI of over 2,000%. Granted, we have zero information on marketing, distribution, or any costs really. These estimates come from the sales in Japan, figured out to be about 500k units, and the 1990 release in America at 700k to possibly even 1 million copies. This is data worked retroactively throughout the decade of its release and may not be accurate, though we do know that it sold a total of 180 million units globally. With a price tag that fluctuated between $40 to $50 USD, which would be about 100 to 120 of our dollars adjusted for inflation, that single game brought Square into billions, if any of this is accurate. Console constraints. Let's talk hardware. If you own a smartphone, it probably has the juice to run the moon landing, if you believe that happened. That's the sort of gap our consoles have these days on the consoles Final Fantasy was released on, so even though we are doing side-by-side analysis, it's not going to be even remotely close. Developed for the Famicom, which was released in Japan 1983, and the NES, which would be released into the US 1985, there's arguments to be made that they were the same console, but I have seen equal arguments suggesting that they are equally separate. I think from a specification standpoint they were similar, but their differences were largely in physical design. Final Fantasy had to work with either of the 8-bit console's limited processing power and memory, so we're going to focus largely on the NES, which was a game changer, pun intended, compared to its competitors at the time. Here are its specs. The CPU, an 8-bit Ryko 2A03 running at a whopping 1.79 megahertz. Yep, megahertz, not gigahertz. RAM, just 2 kilobytes. Today, that's practically nothing. I can't even take a picture. There's no device that I can take a picture on without it adding up more than that. Video RAM, also 2 kilobytes, and that's right, they used RAM for video. Resolution, 256 by 240 pixels. App Store icons have more. Think about that compared to your 4K TV. Colors. It could display 52 colors, but only 25 at the same time. Audio. 5 sound channels, 2 pulse wave, 1 triangle wave, 1 white noise wave, and 1 PCM sample. I don't know what any of that means, so if you are an audio tech nerd, feel free to correct me. So if we compare this to modern consoles, the beasts we have today, like the PS5 or the Xbox Series X, these are powerhouses in comparison. CPUs with 8 cores running at 3.5 and up gigahertz, 16 gigabytes of RAM. That's 8,000 times more than the NES. A dedicated GPU that can handle 4K resolution and ray tracing. Just having a dedicated GPU is already miles above the NES. Terabytes of storage. Terabytes. No more worrying about cartridge space. Support of 3D graphics, online multiplayer streaming, and so much more. Which, even for me, is insane when you really think about it. 3D graphics, online multiplayer, and streaming. You can do all that at the same time. This wasn't even 40 years ago. So if we stack them up, the NES having 1.79 megahertz and modern consoles doing 3.5 gigahertz or more, a quick tech lesson could provide some perspective. 1 gigahertz equals 1000 megahertz, so today's consoles are literally thousands of times faster. The actual NES had no storage. You could not save anything on the console. It was all on the cartridge, and you were often limited to a certain number of saves. The NES had a resolution of 256 by 240, and modern consoles can handle 4K resolution, which is about 3840 by 2160 pixels. Plus, GPUs can handle millions of colors and complex lighting effects, like ray tracing. You ever turn that on and have your computer just... No? You probably got a better computer than me then. I'm looking to upgrade from my 1660. The NES had 5 sound channels. I still don't really even know what that means, but today's consoles offer surround sound, high fidelity audio that can make you feel like you're right in the game, which is true. You put on some headphones and yeah, you can hear distance of people walking or running in video games. It's crazy. The NES was limited. Simple 2D graphics and basic audio, but it was revolutionary and it laid the foundation for everything we have today. Without it, we might not have had the incredible gaming experiences that we now enjoy. But because of these limitations, the team had to use clever programming techniques, like swapping in different tile sets for different locations to create a sense of a vast world despite the actual limitations. So that was the studio, the team, the console, and now finally the story. The story follows the journey of 4 warriors of light, tasked with saving the world by restoring the light to 4 crystals with themes of prophecy, fate, and balance permeating the narrative, ultimately setting the stage for the high fantasy plots that would become the series' staple. The story was relatively straightforward, but it laid the groundwork for more complex narratives that would follow. I'll let myself describe what I thought about the story after I beat the game on Twitch. Got him. Yes! Man, how much HP did he have? That was the hardest fight in the entire game. Very, very slow credits. But all that is now past, and probably no one remembers it, because that's how time loops work. What, so we gotta go slap Garland up even, like again? And this time no one knows he's a villain, so we just gotta go back there, commit murder? No one will ever recall the struggle the 4 endured, for the breaking of the chain means that it never existed. See? Are we really heroes, or did just none of it happen? But within the tales of fantasy that people tell, the memory of their deeds live on. How? How? Who's even remembering to tell? Remember always that the forces of the world must be used as they were intended, that the power of light must never be used for dark, and that the true crystals reside in your heart. Is that a message for us? That's kind of sweet. This is the stuff I'm talking about, how like a lot of games don't... For you are the warrior who crossed time. A lot of games don't have messages like this much anymore, and this is one of the things I want to bring with ours, with our game. Fan reception and impact. At launch, Final Fantasy was well received in Japan, praised for its depth and challenge. However, it took a longer span of time to make its impact on the West. Over time, Final Fantasy has been recognized as a classic, often credited with popularizing the RPG genre outside of Japan, an opinion that I actually hold myself. The game's success not only saved Square, but established the RPG genre as a viable market in gaming. Its comparison to other games at the time was Dragon Quest, the reigning RPG, but Final Fantasy distinguished itself with a more complex battle system and deeper story. While Dragon Quest focused on simplicity and charm, Final Fantasy aimed for a grander scale, both on narrative and gameplay. In Japan, the two were rivals, but Final Fantasy eventually gained a strong foothold in the West that Dragon Quest never really achieved. Did you guys prefer Final Fantasy or Dragon Quest? Personally, by the time I knew of Dragon Quest, I was too young and didn't want to take the steps backwards to play a dated series that felt inferior to Final Fantasy. And Dragon Quest has tried so hard to preserve much of what made it good throughout the years that I feel like it just hasn't been able to break out of its very niche interest, which is why I would call Final Fantasy the more successful of the two. If you disagree, tell me below. So what made Final Fantasy great? It was a game born out of desperation. Yet it delivered an experience that was far greater than the sum of its parts. Its innovative gameplay, memorable music, and captivating stories set a standard that many RPGs still strive to meet this day. For me, playing the original Final Fantasy is a reminder of how creativity and passion can overcome even the most daunting challenges, making a vision work through a constrained lens. It's a game that truly earned its place in history, and I find immense inspiration in that. If FireCastleStudios and EclipseOfEons can see even a fraction of the success of Final Fantasy, I would be ecstatic. That wraps up our deep dive into the first Final Fantasy. We've seen how this humble project can become the cornerstone to a legendary series. Special thanks to Deepu Surotu for uploading many of the source picks to ResetEra.com. Don't know why you're banned. Next video, we'll be exploring Final Fantasy II, a game that took bold risks with its gameplay mechanics and narrative structure. You won't want to miss it, but you'll have to wait for me to beat it on stream first. Unless you want to catch me over there. I stream 10 a.m. Central Standard Time on Twitch, and I go by SiegeJTV just like I do across every platform. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like and subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. What was your first experience with Final Fantasy? Let's talk about it.